So it's another month in Marvel Snap, which means it's time for some more cards to review. The July 2023 season cards got officially formally revealed, and we kind of know what the meta looks like heading into the month, so that means we've got a good idea what these cards might be able to do. In this video, I'll explain how they work, what kind of decks might run them, what sort of impact and power level I expect them to have, and finally rate them from 1 to 4 stars so that you can come back and make fun of me when I get these cards super wrong. So kicking things off here is the Season Pass card for the month, which will be out within a couple hours of this video being published. It is Phoenix Force, a 5/6, and it's got an on reveal here, revive one of your destroyed cards and merge with it. That card can move each turn. So let's talk about how that works first and foremost. We've got some clarifications already from Second Dinner on how this one works. So when you play the Phoenix Force, if you've had a card that was destroyed earlier in the game, it's going to bring that card back to life. The Phoenix Force is actually going to merge onto that card, much like a Hulkbuster would merge onto a card. So it doesn't look like the Phoenix Force, it looks like the destroyed card, which means that any card text on that will be relevant. So in the video example, they brought back a Human Torch that had been destroyed earlier. And then, of course, because this can move, the Human Torch's effect is going to double the stats on the Phoenix Force, which has recently buffed its Human Torch up to 8 power. Then you move it, it goes to 16, etc. So a card like Human Torch that benefits from the move aspect of this can actually be really valuable. You might see the same thing with a Multiple Men or a Vulture, and so on. So some real move synergy plays here, in particular if you're able to splash a little bit of Destroy into that deck in order to set up the Phoenix Force, which isn't really much of an ask, I don't think. Tossing in a Carnage or a Venom in a move deck isn't really asking a lot, and the upside on the Phoenix Force might actually make it really worth it. So that's one of the most probably obvious deck ideas for Phoenix Force, a hybrid there of those two worlds. Sure, it'll take some fine tuning to get that list exactly right, but you can see those cards coming together rather nicely. Another interesting element of the Phoenix Force is that when you do bring that card back, any sort of on reveal text will be there, and it will go off again. So there are some possibilities here for on reveal cards being able to proc valuable on reveal effects a second time. Another thing of note that we were told is that this card does not need 2 spaces in order to operate. So you could play this somewhere that has already gotten 3 cards in play in that spot, and it would still be able to return the card and merge itself, and you wouldn't need 2 spots to do that. It can all happen within a single individual spot, which could indeed increase its flexibility. So a couple interesting ways to use this card. The move Destroy hybrid we talked about. At a floor, this card is kind of a bad Vision, kind of in that like Captain Marvel or Vision space where you can just move it to surprising spots as a 6 power card. That's if you totally whiff on the Destroy aspect. But I think it'll often feel like a Vision Plus where you maybe just destroyed any random thing earlier, just like a Wolverine or something, right? And you pull this back and suddenly, you know, it's like an 8 power Vision because you're just bringing back that Wolverine, and you get a little bit of a bonus stat for a deck that's already destroying things. So a Vision Plus is a decent card. Vision has been played from time to time in Marvel Snap. It has some synergies with stuff like Shuri, which the Phoenix Force also, I think, has some interesting synergies with a card like Shuri, because you're going to be doubling those stats, and when you're stacking multiple card stats together, of course, that can scale even better. So Shuri on 4, this bringing something back on 5, and then like a Taskmaster on 6 could actually be a great line for the Phoenix Force, again, if you're able to weave in some Destroy effects. I also think there's an interesting application of this card for a kind of tech against tech removal. So if your opponent, for instance, is playing a Shang-Chi, and they destroy your really big target, or you expect them to even on turn 6, you can kind of play the Phoenix Force as a way to preemptively bring back that big card, whether they Shang-Chi'd it earlier, or maybe if you don't have priority going into the final turn, you might say, look, you Shang-Chi me, okay, no big deal. That's the only card that's getting destroyed this game, and the Phoenix Force could be a way to answer that and say, okay, I'm just going to get those stats right back to life on the back of the Phoenix Force and really surprise you. So that definitely feels more sneaky, maybe like Conquest format sort of implications, but a possibility nonetheless for this card to punish people even outside of its own kind of pre-built and pre-designed synergies within your deck. So all that said, I definitely can see a few different ways that you're using this card. The move Destroy hybrid Just kind of a spicy vision play. I think there's some big stat applications, maybe just like letting an Atuma die, for instance, bringing it back with Phoenix Force, moving it around to safety or whatever. That could be a possibility for Phoenix Force. And then, you know, that kind of weird, surprising anti-tech stuff is a possibility too, although probably the least common application of the card. Just something probably to keep in mind from a gameplay standpoint. So I don't think this is going to be a staple card you see everywhere. I think it does require support and thought and synergy put into it to be good, but I do think it will be a useful tool for the decks that are able to manage that. So a good card where it fits, just not a universally good card that like everybody's running in every deck, for instance. So moving on to our next card here, it's Jean Grey, a new 3-cost, 3-power card. And she's got a pretty crazy ongoing effect here. Players must play their first card here each turn if possible. So that is an effect that applies to both players. And the if possible is indicating, you know, if like locations don't allow it or if the board is already full in that location, then of course you're able to play elsewhere. They don't want to like lock down the game based on Jean Grey. But in instances where there is a spot to play, Jean Grey is going to force people's hand in order to play there. And presumably if you're running this card, you're going to have a situation where that's not a downside for you. So maybe you're playing this in a Silver Surfer deck, you play Jean Grey, and then you play like Brood behind her, and you fill up the location immediately. You're happy, you got your 4 3-cost cards there to buff with Silver Surfer later, and you're good to go. But the opponent maybe is trying to play like one big card per turn, and they're forced every single turn to keep putting stats in a Jean Grey location where they don't want to, because not every deck is going to be well positioned to play multiple cards per turn and get around the Jean Grey effect. Now, we do have a bounce meta at this exact moment in Marvel Snap where a lot of decks are playing very small, bouncy sort of stuff, and a lot of the times Jean Grey right now, it's like, oh, they just played Kitty Pryde here and then played where they wanted anyway, and the next turn, oh, they played Kitty Pryde here and played where they wanted anyway. So a bounce deck would likely not be impacted by Jean Grey much, if any at all. There's probably not a lot of downsides in this particular meta. So I think it's possible right now, without balance changes or some big shifts in what the meta looks like, that Jean Grey doesn't feel very relevant or very good in this bounce meta. This might be a card we don't see right away, but I do think eventually there will be metas where playing one card per turn is more in vogue, with things like Shuri and stuff in the past being an example of those sorts of decks where, you know, Jean Grey suddenly makes a comeback. And I don't know that every deck is going to be able to run this again, because you're going to want to build your deck in a way where it's not a problem for you to play this card. That could be because you're playing a lot of small stuff yourself, like a bounce deck. It could be because her, you know, alignments here as, say, a 3-cost card makes her great for a Silver Surfer deck. So she just fits into a Surfer deck really nicely. Those are both possibilities, but you're going to need both like the ability to tolerate the Jean Grey, but probably also some other reason to do that, being a meta counter, or like the Silver Surfer synergies, etc., C3 synergies, whatever, you know, whatever deck is able to use her cost or power in some other extra positive way. So I do think that's a pretty limited slice of the meta already for Jean Grey, but her effect is really powerful when all those things do line up. This can be a game-altering, game-winning sort of effect that just completely shuts people out of the game. You could probably even snap into this card on turn 3 if you've identified certain matchups where you think she's going to be really powerful, just because it does force your opponent's hand, maybe lets you win the other 2 locations really easily in those sorts of matchups, which can be awesome. So a card with like a really, really kind of narrow and super high ceiling from a power level standpoint. It's just that we're not going to get there too often, I would say, both based on the meta and deck builds that fit for Jean Grey. So some limitations will keep this one from seeing play super often, I expect. It's probably a good thing, because this card could be really frustrating and limiting from a play experience standpoint. I don't think people are going to want to see Jean Grey with certain matchups. That will feel very, very bad. All right, so next up is Legion, and this one was buffed in the reveal video based on the data mining we discussed previously. This was a 5/7. It had been moved up to 5/8. Sometimes that's still not actually correct in these seasonal videos. We've had things that were wrong in seasonal videos in the past, so hopefully 5/8's the final number, but I think honestly still stay tuned. And Legion, of course, has an on reveal here that replaces each other location with this one. So some crazy, spicy, location manipulation here of the biggest sort. And I mean, obviously you can imagine a lot of game states where that's going to be super useful. You're an on reveal deck and you want to put Camertage everywhere so that you're able to use, you know, your on reveal cards in other spots beneficially. Boom, Legion is awesome. So it's not hard to imagine game states because, you know, you got 3 to choose from every single game. Legion can do something cool and impactful in a lot of cases. And now that he's a 5/8, you're not sacrificing too awful much from a stat standpoint. Here, we've certainly seen cards like Black Bolt played in that 5/8 slot in the past. So it's certainly not impossible for a deck to tolerate a play like this one if they think there's enough upside on this location manipulation sort of card. Now, all that said, that was me being nice to the card to later sort of lay down some sad thoughts here about Legion. I don't think this card's going to be good enough to get played. Basically, yes, you can imagine those situations. Yes, there are locations that would be great to manipulate. Yes, the stats are okay. All of that is true. But a card being good in a card game is not a conversation of like, okay, is that going to be good sometimes? Most every card is going to be good sometimes. They're designed to have, you know, effects that are useful sometimes and powers that are useful sometimes. But that's not the metric of a card's power level. The metric of a card's power level, the measure of whether or not it's good is it going to be played in decks compared to other cards that are an alternative? For instance, would you play it instead of Black Bolt, right? And with Black Bolt, you say, well, I don't know, man. I really like discarding my opponent's cards, and I really like stature getting cheaper. Is that effect worth more than Legion? Or take this and compare it to any other various 5-drop across the game. Or maybe alternatively, if you're looking for some sort of location manipulation or location surprise, are you actually better off running, you know, a Storm or a Scarlet Witch or a Magic, which can also do a turn 5 location manipulation? You have to compare it against all of these other possibilities. What is the opportunity cost of running Legion? Because again, you just say it's turn 5, would a Legion be good here? Yeah, there's a lot of instances it would. But it's turn 5, would I rather have other cards in my deck doing other bigger things, bigger stats, more impactful plays, etc.? That's where Legion often, I think, gets left behind and gets left on the cutting room floor, because I think 5 energy is a lot for a location manipulation sort of card, and decks that care about that are able to use that, or are looking for some sort of extra layer of consistency or surprise there, might just have cheaper options to go to instead and just play more impactful, more immediate, more game-winning late-game cards like Legion. Sometimes just having that higher power, higher impact effect will feel much better than a 5/8 where sometimes it feels like it's hard to get value out of it. So this is one of those situations where, yeah, I think the card is totally fine. Cool, fun effect. I'm actually really excited to play this one. Sometimes my hair looks a bit like this guy's hair, which is cool, but ultimately probably gets left behind a lot in the deck building process, and therefore I think a card probably doesn't get played a ton. All right, so next up is Mirage, a new 2-cost, 2-power. On reveal, copy the lowest cost card in your opponent's hand into your hand and give it +2 power. So this is a nice little, little tempo card that's a bit of a value generator. Something like Cable comes to mind as a comparison. But I think really nicely is that you're getting reconnaissance value out of this one. Seeing stuff that's in your opponent's hand, of course, can be useful. Kind of understanding what you might need to play around. I think often that'll be sort of a 1-cost card. They're sort of waiting to weave into a later turn. But sometimes it might be something like a Cerebro or Patriot. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that's the lowest cost card in hand. I see they're chilling on that Patriot ready to go. And that gives you information about the game that's really useful. But also nicely is that you're getting an efficient play in hand, because that +2 buff, particularly on lower cost cards, is going to feel really nice. For instance, if you get like an Iceman out of your opponent's hand or something, you're getting a 1/4 to go with your 2/2. That makes it a 3/6 from an efficiency standpoint, which feels pretty good while still getting some upside and maybe some bonus effect off whatever card you take from your opponent. So you kind of get to go 1-to-1 with their card, but you get a buff along the way. Now, you are sacrificing a little bit of stats on Mirage, but if you get a cheap enough card, that's still going to feel like you made up for it without spending too much energy to get some of those stats back. So recon value and just like stuff to play value, which can be nice for a lot of decks to fill in an early curve. Even something like a bounce deck might be able to play a card like Mirage, just get some cheap stuff to go with. There's also chances you can grab something really cool like a Kitty Pride, Might be kind of hard because that's often on board, not in hand, but maybe if you get lucky, or they have to hold it in hand for a turn or whatever reason. Mirage could get you some cooler upside stuff there as well. And then I guess occasionally it could just hit really big cards too. That's far less likely, but always something to keep in the back of your mind. So look, this card is not really flashy. It's not like hyper synergistic. I don't think that many decks are going to find an excuse to run Mirage, but I do think this is a card that shows up from time to time. Decks that are just kind of looking for stats or a little bit more early game consistency, Mirage is probably pretty decent. Just get a couple bodies down on board, play for priority early, get a little information along the way. Mirage allows you to do all of those sorts of things without really asking too much of itself. So I don't know, man. I think some decks will toss this in. I mean, there are decks that will certainly care more about just doing their own thing and having a game plan to enact, but others that have a little bit more freedom or space to work with, Mirage feels like a totally fine card to toss in. And then finally here we have Echo, a new 1/2 that reads, after your opponent plays an ongoing card here, remove its abilities. So this is kind of a little preemptive way to limit your opponent's ability to play ongoing cards in powerful fashion. So a couple ways you might want to use this. Number one is to just say, hey, look, you don't get to play your big thing in this space. This space is mine for whatever reason. So I need to make sure you can't Cosmo this location. This is one answer to Cosmo of very few we have in the game currently. I don't want you to Cosmo here. I need to set this up for on reveals. Or I don't want you to play a big Darkhawk here for whatever reason. I need to win this. Oh, it's Onslaught Citadel. Screw you. I'm not letting you do that. Or I don't want you to Iron Man this lane. Forget that, right? Don't want you to Devil Dino this lane. I don't know why I just keep listing examples. I think you get the idea at this point. Alternatively, you could actually use this card to try to snipe that in a surprising fashion. Instead of just laying it out and saying, no, this is shut off to you, you could also, if you are revealing first and you have priority, try to snipe this. Like if you know they're about to play that Devil Dino or Iron Man on turn 5 and you think you know where they're going to do it, you can use this as like a really cheap Enchantress, basically, where you call your shot, call your timing window, and boom, you answer their super big, powerful ongoing effect for only 1 energy, which could be super efficient if you're really, really good. Now, from a tech card standpoint, I think that's a little bit risky, a little bit scary sometimes, and I don't think most decks are going to want to tolerate that. I think, if you're playing a Sarah deck, getting an Enchantress in is not a big ask. You don't mind playing it. The stats are decent anyway. So if you're trying to answer ongoing cards in a more reliable way, Enchantress is the way to go. Echo might be more useful as a way to protect against the Cosmo sorts of cards of the world instead, if you're worried that's something that's going to completely shut you down, or if it ever became a big part of the meta. Now, that said, as a 1/2, it's free to toss into decks in a lot of ways, but there are so many good 1-drops that are so powerful and do such amazing things. This one that is a kind of situational, unpredictable, unreliable tech card or weird setup card of sorts, boy, I think that's a big ask for a lot of decks to run. I think it's going to have a very specific use case. Most decks are not going to be looking to do this. They have just they want just good plays early that do things. The Icemans, the Kitty Prides, the Nebulas, the Sunspots. The list of good 1-drop cards that go into so many decks is getting bigger and bigger over time. And I just don't see how Echo competes. This feels just a far too specific of an effect for me. But, here and there, some metas that are heavily reliant on ongoing. This might just be another way to deny that. You've got this and Enchantress suddenly, right? It's like, okay, now we're cooking. Now we can really shut down some of these big ongoing cards. So I will definitely try this out in some decks that are all about hating on things and denying the opponent their fun. But the average deck on the average day, I don't think Echo makes the cut. Phoenix Force is a 3-star card. Jean Grey is a 3-star card. Legion is a 2-star card. Mirage is a 3-star card. Echo is a 2-star card. So there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Curious what you all think about these cards. How would you rank these? For me, I'm probably going to say Phoenix Force is number 1, but man, Jean Grey is a really close number 2. I think depending on the week or the month, those will Those will shift. Number 3 for me would be Mirage. Number 4 would be Legion. And I think number 5 is Echo for me. I almost gave this card 1 star in the reviews. But, you know, a Cosmo preemptive counter ability gave her that 2-star bump. So those would be my rankings for this month. So nothing is like a crazy standout to me, but I think a few cards we'll see in some real decks here and there. And Phoenix Force does have some like good crazy potential here and there as more cards come out in the future. You might see this one get better and better over time, where I think a lot of these other ones are fixed. So that's why he takes the number 1 spot for me. I don't know what Phoenix Force is, but it takes the number 1 spot for me. So thanks everybody for watching. Love you all a ton as always. Share your thoughts on these cards below. Stay tuned for me playing decks with all of these cards every week, of course. And until next time, game on.